and welcome to episode 126 of Prose. This week, look again at the world, this time without childlike wonder, and work to stamp out happy colonists. I'm sure you can hear this, but just to make sure you know you're not mad, there is still a sound difference to the episodes. At time of recording, I am still traveling, so Prose is on the go. Thank you for your patience with the variance in sound. I will forgo my usual pleas, shorten these introductory comments, and simply encourage you to go explore prosepodcast.com. One last bit of business, though. Today is the creator of our theme song and one of the first and greatest supporters of the podcast's birthday. Happy birthday, Justin Magee. I hope you celebrate and celebrate well. Thanks for listening. Let's get to the tales, shall we? This week, we have the Menagerie and a Merrier colony. Enjoy. The Menagerie, an original short story by Justin Magee. Memory is a funny thing, isn't it? The grandiose to a child quickly becomes the unimpressive to the adolescent, and the utterly mundane, the not but pedestrian, to the adult. I think most about the times and places of my childhood on those rare occasions I am driving those old streets and seeing them with those more underwhelmed, unimaginative eyes. The rolling fields and rocket ships of Whispering Brook Park are reduced to stinking ditches with fetid water and a few ramshackle pieces of playground equipment that were placed there some decades past. The kind old deacons from my dad's old church who were supportive and the equivalent of wizened wizards now sit outside the Rebel Yell restaurant, complaining about the blacks and the Democrats as their Confederate flag stickers glint on their bumpers. The old junior high school building that was big enough to hold an entire universe and was said to look and feel like a prison, while housing some of the best moments of our young lives. It is just a rather humble building of stone. A solid piece of construction built with leftover earthworks, stone, and love, imbued with the hopes of a generation long gone, still being used for education, though not for the more traditional students it once served. The living nativity that was the biblical manger scene come to life is now some haphazardly laying hay and a handful of animals. Though, they have camels this year, and that is rather exotic. Maybe the living nativity didn't lose as much of its luster after all. Then again, I've always had a soft spot for animals. That brings my mind around to one of the grandest of childhood haunts that has come down from the halls of the gods and more to our earthly plane. Davis's pet shop was a place like no other to my brother and me. Even though we never really got to shop there, as we already had several dogs and a handful of cats we were taking care of on our property, just going into the store was magical. Upon entry, we were assaulted by the smell of exoticism incarnate. Cherry, vanilla, chocolate. Strange scents and flavors my young nose and tongue had not yet encountered. They all rushed together in the form of thick smoke to meet us when we walked into the door. The tobacconist shop that was the other half of the family's small business certainly did not go unnoticed. But my family and I never went in there. We were not smokers, nor could we think to spend the kind of money that was needed to get those fancy cigars or pipe tobaccos that were showcased in the displays of the smoke shop. On those rare occasions I zigged right when my parents went left, I still wouldn't enter the tobacco hawking side of the business. A hulking cigar store Indian stood as a silent sentinel blocking my path. I was terrified of that guardian bearing some poor caricature to a Native American chief. I was not scared of him per se. Rather, his stern visage kept me from wanting to wander into the forbidden lands. Once through the wall of smoke and smells, and after avoiding the temptation to veer a hard right toward the tobacconist, a different world awaited. On the left, writhing almost serpentine, but fuzzier than fuzzy, was a cage full of ferrets. The walls were tall and the holes were small, so the little beasts could not get out. But their energy and foibles were on full display for the shoppers. Signs scrawled on neon poster board warned of not touching because they might bite. But we would occasionally stick our fingers in to touch the fine coats of the ferrets as they romped in their limited space anyway. Past the ferrets were other cages full of fuzzy mammals. Chinchillas were the most exotic, but there were the usual hamsters, mice, rats, and more. Occasionally, a sugar glider would show up for sale. Well into adulthood, I would continue to want to save those shy little creatures from pet shops. A little more frequently, puppies and kittens would be just inside the shop, generally coming from some friend of the owner's dog or cat having just had a litter, and they'd all play and bound on top of each other in small enclosures. That was always fun. We were encouraged to play with them. We would ooh and goo over all the fluffy denizens of the pet store before wandering into the larger section of the back wall. There, we would find tanks of reptiles, amphibians, and fish. My aunt and uncle, though being rather poor, loved animals, and a lower-cost pet that they could handle was a fish. Multiple fish, really. They would deck out their fish tanks as best they could, and the days they would go into Davis's pet shop for a new fish were the best. We would pore over the different tanks, looking for fish that would fit into the miniature ecosystems they were building back home. My brother and I were tasked with discerning which were the most lively, which had the best personalities, and which were the most vibrant among their friends. If we were buying a fish, we'd help our family choose, point out our selection, have the workers fish the fish out of the tanks, pay, and then haul tail out of the shop, rushing against traffic and time to ensure that we got the little aquatic addition to our family home with time to spare to get them into their new tank. On the days we did not purchase a fish, we would continue to meander our way through the aisles, leaving my least favorite parts of the store for last. I never liked the reptile section. The lizards were cute and interesting enough to me, but I never liked the snake section. They smelled funny, too musky for my tastes. They smelled of danger. They looked of danger. Moreover, the workers would sometimes bring one of the boas or pythons out and allow passers-by to hold them. My brother and I always shied away when they started draping the snakes across the shoulders of patrons. We learned that fear from our mother, I think. But I also have a feeling it has something to do with that far deeper programming that is embedded in all of us. After our tentative adventure through the reptile section, we would finish up in the back room. This room wasn't utterly closed off, but it was all but. It was surrounded on all sides with one wall having an entrance that would have held a door, but the hinges sat doorless, allowing shoppers to go in and out at will. One wall was a massive glass window, there to theoretically encourage shoppers to come back and pay the birds that were in residence there a visit. Parrots, cockatiels, parakeets, finches, canaries, and so many more. The din was almost unbearable. The calls and cries and warbles and songs and screeches and words. Words from some of the larger birds. I avoided the reptiles because they scared me. I avoided the birds because they saddened me. They broke my heart. Too many birds stuffed into a cage here. A sickly bird not getting the attention, food, or water it needed over there. For the same reason I eventually came to hate zoos, I tried my best to avoid the bird room. There were a couple times when I convinced my mother and father to liberate a bird or two. I had several parakeets growing up. Green and yellow ones being named Oscar, blue and white ones being named Snowball. There was even one time that we freed a finch. I named him Atticus and read The Lord of the Rings to him all the time. The birds never lasted too long, though. They were meant to be in the skies, not in some kid's room locked in a cage with newspaper and dried up seed as its only company and enrichment. The only other animals that would show up at the shop were holiday specific. For example, ducks and chicks and bunnies were there in droves around Easter, driving children wild. Christmas time always brought a few extra puppies in need of adoption. Every now and again, something even more exotic than the sugar gliders and chinchillas would crop up, a one-off, assumedly, that the family had happened into, especially in the summertime. One time a Gila monster, another a cage full of tarantulas. Once and only once there was a capuchin monkey there in the shop. Looking back, I bet that was highly illegal. But maybe not. Memory is a funny thing, isn't it? Davis's pet shop was a place of grandeur and celebration to my brother, my family, and me in my younger years. It was a menagerie to rival the Gardens of Babylon or Noah's Ark. I thought it was something to behold that I would never tire of. The grandiose in this case not only became unimpressive or mundane or pedestrian, it became depressing, an expression of disdain for the majesty of the animal world. It also became depressing because my child's eyes had always seen that dual family business as the trade of a people akin to wizards mixed with millionaires. Now I see that it is just another family struggling to get by. A family that happens to have grasped onto two things they love. And they are doing their damnedest to get by and to endure. We don't go to the menagerie anymore. The last time I went in over there, it was to go to the smoke shop. The Indian was no longer there to keep me out, and I wanted some fancy imported rum-soaked cigarillos for a friend's birthday. So in I went. I could hear the screeches and hoots and calls from through the glass and wall space that separated the tobacco from the menagerie. Shouts of longing and fear and desire and defeat and despair. Hopelessness and terror married and come to life. My stomach turned then. I bought my tobacco and left the shop smelling like all those forbidden puffs that still transported me back upon my smelling them. The smoke clung to my clothes, just as those memories of the menagerie clung to the forefront of my mind as I made my way back into the real world, my adult world, devoid of the soft corners and endless magic that once was there. Thank you for listening to The Menagerie, an original short story by me, Jared I. Magee. Please stick around as we jump back in time to visit a colony out on the East Coast in Massachusetts and a little bit of creative historical fiction. Stick around for our next short story, A Merrier Colony. A Merrier Colony, an original short story by Justin Magee. Greetings and salutations. I am writing to tell you about the damnable other colony. They have the word Merry in their name, and that is surely no accident. They seek to steal people away from Plymouth with their promise of atheism and heathenism. I know not when they find the time to trade or sow the seeds that see them being the bastion of agriculture that they have quickly become. Many here demand that this must be because of the magics worked by the natives that come to and from the colony at will with no tax or violence exacted or visited. I cannot say that I disagree. Just last springtime, they invited the natives to attend their pagan festivities around the largest maypole I myself have ever seen. God's people and heathen alike danced and frolicked around a spire erected to lascivious gods and purposes and symbols, higher than even the church steeples in their colony or ours. The revelry lasted for almost a full week. Whereas we try to remain pious and focused, never wavering from the seriousness of our purpose to committing ourselves and our every action to God, Merrymount throws caution to the wind and is inundated with celebratory verve and pomp day in and day out. I tell you, their happiness isn't natural. No group of people could be that cheery that much without making deals with darker forces or giving into one's human urges, abandoning the search for godliness on this terrestrial plane. Now, I know that Standish took Morton back to the motherland for a time, but as you well know by now, he quickly returned but a year or more later. This cannot stand. Beyond the sins that are all heaped upon one another, day in and day out in Merrymount, Morton himself and all of his followers are trying their best to encourage all residents to share profits and land and responsibility equally. Can you imagine? No man is encouraged to rise above another. No one sees fit to work to better their station. If one falls sick or lame, they are given the same as a man working for his fair shake. What's more is that the fur and the crops and the shipping lanes are making Morton's stand a success in the eyes of the colonists. Here, I hear the sin of envy whispering forward from my people. The Reverend reminds them that this is unseemly and a deadly sin to boot, but they cannot help but see what Merrymount is doing and want it for themselves. Part of this success and this communal atmosphere must be because of the heathen natives. They are tempting the good English people onto strange paths. To date, I do not know why they trade so heavily with Morton and his Merrymount colonists. We all know that Morton has benefited from Wollaston's work in the area, but you would think that they would have pushed back against Morton once they caused the insurrection against Wollaston. But the natives have no regard for order. They do not understand indentured contracts, or the breaching thereof. They do not comprehend that Jesus himself spoke of the slave being kind to his master, and vice versa. Morton has even given up his title, choosing to be called Mine Host, a meaningless title that allowed him to be one of many, just another man among other simple men. Supposedly, He and the natives do not even have any treaties written down or recorded. Marymount and the Native Confederation both say treaties are unnecessary, as they trust one another completely. Trust one another. Again, I ask, can you imagine? Marymount and all her residents consider themselves the same as these native peoples. The man shares the Book of Common Prayer with them, and they mix their Christian beliefs with those practices of the peoples of this land. Just as problematic, the man is selling them our weapons, teaching them our tactics, advancing their education on the ways of the empire. This cannot stand. Souls and lives are both in the balance. Massasoit and his Wampanoag Confederates do still continue to work with us, but the partnership simply isn't as fruitful or as smooth as that they have with our neighbors. You read Bradford's account of all this, did you not? I have been told under good authority that many across the ocean neglected to read this full account. I shall not reproduce it here in its entirety, but I do think that your reading his precise words that second my objections and underscore them, and just a bare few of the many affronts to godliness and Christianity that is going on there in Marymount is of the utmost importance. So, without further ado, here they are.
They then fell to utter licentiousness and led to dissolute and profane life. Morton became lord of misrule and maintained, as it were, a school of atheism. As soon as they acquired some means by trading with the Indians, they spent it in drinking wine and strong drinks to great excess, as some reported, 10 pounds worth in a morning. They set up a maypole, drinking and dancing about it for several days at a time, inviting Indian women for their consorts, dancing and frisking together like so many fairies, or furies, rather, to say nothing of worse practices. It was as if they had revived the celebrated feasts of the Roman goddess Flora, or the beastly practices of the mad Bacchanalians. Morton, to show his poetry, composed sundry verses and rhymes, some tending to lasciviousness, and others to the detraction and scandal of some persons, affixing them to his idol or idol maypole. They changed the name of the place, and instead of calling it Mount Wollaston, they called it Marymount, as if this jollity would last forever. In order to maintain his riotous prodigality and excess, Morton, hearing what profit the French and the fishermen had made by trading guns, powder, and shot to the Indians, began to practice it hereabouts, teaching them how to use them. Having instructed them, he employed some of them to hunt and fowl for him, until they became far more able than the English, owing to their swiftness on foot and nimbleness of body, being quick-sighted and knowing the haunts of all sorts of game. With that result, when they saw what execution a gun could do and the advantage of it, they were mad for them and would pay any price for them, thinking their bows and arrows but baubles in comparison.
Do you see? Do you understand the depths of depravity going on here? We did not escape our island home to experience this filth. Endicott and his people of the newer colony by the bay have come to refer to Morton's colony as Mount Dagon. Here, in the New Canaan, among the milk and honey in abundance, he is of the Canaanites, and we are of God's chosen people. We have come to love Endicott's framing. The word out on the bay is that they are planning actions against these brutes. We may not have the Ark of the Covenant to go out before us, but we can still stand our ground against the rampant, diabolical usurping of our new home. Morton may still prance and extol bedecked in late blooms of the late spring, but the time is quickly coming where we rein in the madness. With Massachusetts Bay and Plymouth combined, our compact with one another and our compact with God Almighty will be renewed and faithfully restored on this continent. By the time you read this, sir, we will have acted. I write in advance of our actions simply to alert you to the degradation of some of the colonists and the danger that this egalitarianism born of the savages. Please continue to pray ceaselessly for us, and we will do the same for you. I will encourage further correspondence and explanation from Branford and Endicott, as well as from both reverends, as we pursue God's justice. Eternally yours, in Christ, Jonathan Winford. Thank you for listening to this little bit of historical fiction, titled A Merrier Colony, an original short story by me, Justin Magee. All sound and music that you've heard throughout the episode come from YouTube's free audio library and freesound.org. Everything is being used under CC 0.1.0 public domain dedication licenses. That does it this week for Prose, but I will beg everyone to keep an eye on your feeds, as we'll have a little special something for St. Patrick's Day coming up in the coming 10 days. Beyond that, in 2 weeks' time, we'll return with another regular episode. Until then, love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is, always, stranger than fiction. Thank you so much for listening.